Today, we're pleased to have with us Dr. Bruno Lanvin, founder and CEO of Descartes Institute. Dr. Bruno has had a distinguished career with roles at the United Nations, the World Bank, INSEAD, and IMD. He is widely recognized for his pioneering work in developing influential global indices in information technology, talent, innovation, smart cities, and future readiness. Dr. Bruno Lanvin, it's great to have you with us today here in Riyadh.
Thank you for receiving me, beautiful Riyadh.
Your work addresses critical areas such as social and economic development, sustainability, and inclusiveness, all of which are vital for driving economic growth and job creation. In today's conversation, we would like to hear your stance on how decision makers in the GCC can tackle these challenges and chart a path towards a stronger and more sustainable future. So let's get started with our first question to you. As GCC countries are working towards transitioning to diversified economies, what strategic guidance would you offer them to leverage their vast resources in innovation and technological development?
This is one of the most exciting questions we can ask, not just about GCC, about the world in general. But they've taken a new turn recently. COVID has changed everything.
Sure.
We have a number of instances where the definitions we used to use are not valid anymore. So what are the facts and what are the things that have changed? The facts first. GCC is and will remain for a while one of the most dynamic regions in the world. Okay, that's a fact. Second one, GCC is one part of the world where the experience of diversification has been at the top of national and regional agendas for already quite a while. So well equipped to benefit from what is happening in new areas like artificial intelligence, like data-based decision-making, because services have been developed, for instance, financial services, transportation, tourism, culture-related. So all of that has been happening already. And in many of these areas, the GCC nations are ahead of the rest of the world. And the third fact, which in my view is very important, is demography. GCC has a very young population. So looking at those facts and comparing that to what has changed, what are the bases for future action? What could work better than other ways? Well, what has changed for me can be summarized at least in three sentences. One is the emergence of data as the basis of new economies. That includes not only digitization, but also what we make out of artificial intelligence and other consequences from that. The region has the infrastructure. It has a population which is tech savvy. It has the equipment. It has the usage. So that would be an area where GCC countries can make them. Second change is the growing importance of talent in international competition. As I mentioned before, demography is on the right side in this part of the world. Additionally, GCC countries have learned to grow, attract, and retain talent. Third element of change, the growing role of cities as compared to national governments, and the existence of hubs, internationally recognized global hubs like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Riyadh, but also Jeddah, looking at a more distant past, and Neom, looking at a not so distant future, are part of that.
So, given the unique cultural and demographic dynamics in the GCC, how do you see these influencing the design and implementation of smart city initiatives? And we would like to hear your take on what considerations should be taken into account to ensure inclusivity and accessibility.
Indeed, I do believe that cities will be at the core of the next wave of globalization. There are many areas in which cities during COVID have proved more agile, more innovative, more reactive than national governments. And this has brought lessons for the different parts of the world and groups of population. I do believe, however, that the concept of smart cities has been very heavily driven until now by technology. That is, the whole definition of smart cities has been revolving about using technologies to improve the life of citizens. We're now in the need of a refreshed definition of smart cities. The refreshed definition I suggest is what I call the positive definition of smart cities. Positive is an 8-letter word. So each of those letters can spell out an important component. Let's start with the P. The P is for people-centric. That, for me, is the key ingredient. Technology is there to be used, but if you don't start with the real needs of your real people, you're not going to create any enthusiasm about smart cities. The O is for open. This is extremely important because we can't imagine a smart city succeeding on its own, isolated from the rest of the world. If indeed cities are going to take a growingly important role in globalization, they have to play global roles. They have to trade with other cities. They have to exchange talent, investment, ideas with other cities around the world. So openness to other culture, other practices, other ways of thinking is going to be a critical element of success. Let's move to the S of positive. That's sustainability. Sustainability is the tall order objective of the planet as a whole. However, it is often narrowed to environmental sustainability. Sustainability includes economic sustainability, social sustainability, political sustainability. All these elements can be embedded in the proper design of governance at city level.
Yeah.
The first I in positive is about inclusion. So being inclusive, and then we'll come back to that in a second, is not just to say we need to make an effort to have people with disabilities better integrated in our city. It goes far beyond that and calls on the notion of solidarity. The T is for tech-savvy. It's not because we don't want smart cities to be technology-driven exclusively that we should forget about technology. Technology is going to provide a number of very innovative solutions to existing problems. So having a technology-savvy population is very important to the success of smart cities. The second I is for innovation. Innovation is critically important, and cities are the place where innovation can take place for two reasons, rather than just at national level. First, because when we look at the world map of innovation, we see that it's very unevenly distributed across nations. We have places that are generally called innovation hubs or clusters or sometimes districts where innovation takes place. The ecosystems you can develop in those places are generally limited in terms of geographical span. This is where the real side of innovation takes place, and smart cities will have a critical role to play in that. Then we move to the V for versatility. It's wrong to think that, as sometimes attempted, a smart city can be the best in the world at doing one thing. I cannot imagine a city that would say, we are the best city in the world for, let's say, tourism plus business plus health. So if you come for a conference, you can stay an additional 2 days and have a rejuvenating stay in one of our clinics, and at the same time visit our museums. That's a combined package that needs to be designed as such, but there's so many other elements around it in terms of how easy is it to come to our city? How easy will it be for you to continue your daily work because we have good broadband connectivity, etc., etc., etc. So this versatility means that a smart city will not be successful if they specialize in only one area. They will have to combine areas in which they can generate a unique comparative advantage. Last but not least, the A is for excellence. And the excellence is about branding. Cities will compete with each other to be global competition.
Yeah.
And to survive and win in that competition, excellence is required. So if you put all together these positive elements, and since your question was very much about what is the role of inclusion and what is the role of the population and talent, let me just go back very quickly to the 2 and why GCC countries are very well equipped to develop that positive approach to smart cities. On the side of people, I mentioned demography already, young population, big advantage. But we also see that in the large majority of GCC countries, conscious and very successful efforts have been made to grow, attract, and retain talent. Grow by developing local institutions, sometimes with international alliances, attracting well-known universities, business schools, but also developing local universities, as here in Riyadh, but also in other places in the region, to develop local capacities to meet the talents of tomorrow. Attract is something that has to do with getting the right kind of talents at the right time. The talents needed today may not be the talents needed tomorrow. There are talents that may be provided locally in 5 years from now that are not available today. So attracting these talents is critically important. And efforts made in GCC are starting to show success. I think we see in global indicators like the Global Talent Competitiveness Index, GTCI, that indeed GCC countries are moving up the rankings. And one of the reasons for that is that for a very long time, one of the advantages of this part of the world was its ability to give good salaries, good remuneration. And the idea was, if we pick enough this high-level talent, they will come. Which is true, they came. But they came for a project, they came for a limited duration, and then they went back home.
Yeah.
Now the challenge is, how do we create the idea that being here, working here, is not only going to benefit us, the GCC countries, but also those talent that come and work here. And last but not least, diversity. Diversity is a consequence of that, brain circulation. It is also a key ingredient for innovation. So if innovation is a critical element in your diversification policy, then talent policies are going to be a critical ingredient of that. And again, GCC countries are showing the world that they can take the right steps to do that.
As we know, achieving such goals requires the right talent and expertise. In your view, Dr. Lanvin, what role do regulatory frameworks play in enhancing or hindering talent competitiveness, particularly in attracting and fostering tech talent?
Yes, in this next wave of globalization, regulatory environment will be critically important to competitiveness. And in all areas you can think of. One of the areas where it will be even more strategic than in other areas is that of talent. Mm-hmm. Because talent has become a globally fluid resource. Let me try to explain that in simple terms. We used to work and live in a world where talent was the subject of fears and concerns. One of them was that of brain drain.
Yeah.
That is, a number of emerging economies were concerned by the fact that some of their best younger people were attracted to other countries to get a higher education, and many of them would stay there, would create value, would create companies in those other countries. And the reaction was to say, oh, it's our brain drain, it's their brain gain, and that was a zero-sum game. We now live in a different world. This is the world of what I call brain circulation. In brain circulation, an employer can have a young resource, a young talent, and see that talent say one day, sorry, boss, I'm going to leave you because I got a more attractive
job
offer from another company, which may be a competitor in another country. Mm-hmm. And in the old days, that employer would be sorry and say, what did I go wrong? How could I let such a high talent go away? Now, that employer would typically say, enjoy that experience, try to get additional skills and experience, and maybe you will want to come back. Mm-hmm. And the bet, because it's always a bet, is that indeed the country that this person is leaving will also be the country where the person comes back with additional skills and talent. Mm-hmm. We saw that for India, for instance, the number of young Indian talents that immigrated to the US, got an education, started companies, and then went back to India and contribute to the economic boom we've seen after year 2000 is an example of that. in that kind of environment, the regulatory instruments you have are radically different, because they're not just, granting visas for student status anymore and looking at quotas, etc. It's about managing the right incentive to encourage people to want to come back after a while, or to continue circulate, but always have this ability to flow back as a national resource. And again, the experiences that we've seen develop across GCC are very encouraging. We've seen countries, economies, and cultures that have become more and more open. They are more and more friendly to those talents, and they're also more amenable to taking the risk that their own talent will temporarily go away. That's the new kind of equation in which the regulatory environment becomes so important. Now, one last point about this, which goes beyond talent, because it touches the whole innovation equation in which talent is critically important. Regulators will have very important role to play to be supportive of the whole ecosystem around innovation. So it's not just regulatory environment about talent or about VCs or about this or that. It's looking in real time at all the ingredients of what constitutes a vibrant ecosystem.
Yeah.
And there we need a rare breed, which I call enlightened regulators. Regulators traditionally have been brought, educated, trained in regulating one particular area. So you had very good telecom regulators. Then you had very good media regulators. At some point, media and telecom started to merge in one sector. And then we've seen some GCC countries becoming very good at having enlightened regulators.
Yes.
Who are able to combine the thinking of a media person and thinking of a telecom person. In an innovation ecosystem, you have so many disciplines that versatility, again, becomes a critical quality of enlightened regulators. And I'm very optimistic that GCC, again, is going to be one part of the world when we see that emerging.
You just highlighted how critical talent is to driving innovation and talent competitiveness in the GCC, especially with the brain circulation that you just mentioned. As we know, benchmarks and indices often serve as valuable tools to evaluating progress. What lessons GCC countries can learn from global indices in measuring innovational and technological advancements, and how can these lessons be tailored to their unique challenges?
So, indeed, benchmarking is a critical element in terms of ensuring, stimulating progress. But I would like to insist on the fact there are things also that global indices cannot or should not be. First, global indices, at least the ones I've been creating and I'm working on, are not there to name and shame. They're not going to be an instrument to give award and say, you are very good, you're not good, okay? That's not the purpose of global indices. A global index is useful if it is used. If it is used, it means it's a tool for action. And if it's a tool for action, it should generate improvements. That, for me, are the key ways in which benchmark can be benchmarked. So they are my own indicators. In GCC, they have been used in that way. We've seen one of the first countries in the world to consider the Global Information Technology Index that I started in year 2000 with the World Economic Forum as a basis for the national ICT strategy was Qatar.
Okay.
So a GCC country, and many other countries around the world have been doing the same. I'm confident that the same is going to happen again and again. That is, working in an environment where these benchmarks are not the end of the world. They are a tool for action. Clearly, they are about comparing performances. So you always want to be better than your neighbor. You want to be better than comparable economies. That's part of the game. That's stimulation. So stimulate is the first key word about these global indices. The second one is emulate. That is, what are the lessons that can be drawn from the experience of the champions? It's always better to look up. Who is doing better than us? Than to look down and say, hey, we are better than this one, okay, or that. The way, the lessons that, in my view, matter most for GCC, looking at what the champions of these global indices have been in talent, innovation, in other areas, is number one, it's not enough to be a big country to be a champion. We have all these smaller economies like Switzerland, like Nordic countries, who've been ranking very high in those. So that's the lessons. Yes, in the region, there is a giant. That's Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And then the rest is smaller economies, typically around 1-2 million people. And everybody has something to gain. This is something that is of critical importance for the dynamics of the region, and for me matters very much. Second element, if we look at how these economies at the top of the ranking have been performing, sometimes some of them are not number one in any of the pillars of the indices, but they have a very well-distributed level of performance. There's no pillar in which they are lower, let's say, than 10th or 15th. So having a balanced performance means that it's not enough to focus in one area and say, that I can improve if you neglect the rest. So being able to look at the whole ecosystem around talent, around innovation, around technology is a critical element for success and improvement in these global indices. And the last one is that all these methodology, the data collection, etc., improve with time. So they are not cast in stone. So the experience of countries is, and their feedback is a critical element that will allow us to improve on the methodology, to be closer to the reality of the ground. That is what's really happening in cities, in countries around this big thing. So for all those reasons, I think there are lessons that can be learned, and most of them have been learned already. So we see the challenges, the implementation. But altogether, if we try to look 10 years down the road, what do we expect these global indices, these benchmarks, to do for accelerating progress in GCC economy? To me, it boils down to one very simple phrase, which is future readiness. In the end, whether you work at talent, you work at technology, you work at innovation, you work at smart cities, you want to be future ready. But future readiness is not a passive context. It doesn't mean, the future is going to happen, we better be ready for it. There is an ambition behind future readiness, which is that there is a possibility for the GCC region and GCC members to be shapers of the future, to be leaders of the future.
Exactly.
And that ambition is what I call the core of future readiness. And if global indices can help to do that, I'd be very happy.
Thank you, Dr. Bruno Lanvin. Thank you for joining us today. It's been a great pleasure hearing your thoughts. So we've covered important topics from innovation and smart cities to talent competitiveness and global benchmarks for each. Your expertise will surely help guide the GCC countries navigating better these challenges. So thank you for your time once again.
Thank you.
We hope you found today's conversation as insightful and inspiring as we did. Thank you for listening.